Hello, welcome to episode 7. One day I'll get the introduction correct. Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Election Countdown, our special treat for you today, because I'm joined by Tim Norwood.
Hi.
Who recently did a performance, was it 2 days ago and yesterday?
Yes.
Called Apocalypse of the Mind. So tell us about Apocalypse of the Mind.
Okay. So, Apocalypse of the Mind is a solo show that I've been developing, and I was funded by the Arts Council to do it, and supported by Theatre Delicatessen as well, and also BB's Italian Restaurant. Shout out to BB's, they're amazing. You can bring your own wine.
I should probably tag them later.
Yeah, let's do it. So the show is set at the end of the world, and the story is that I am the last surviving man, telling stories of myths and legends from throughout history to the audience.
What was your inspiration behind the story?
So the major theme of the show is mental health / mental illness, and I didn't so much create the show after thinking of something clever to make it about. It just sort of happened that way. I guess it's that depression feels like the end of the world, is the sort of one sentence summary of it.
So it's more about how people see themselves while they have depression. Because when I watched it, certainly I had a feeling that while it may not have been the end of the world outside, it certainly was for your character during that performance.
Yeah. One of my aims with the show was to communicate how it feels to suffer from depression. And there's a very particular mindset which is very common among people who are depressed. So it's things like a feeling of hopelessness, very cynical attitude, and flawed thinking, which feels like genius thinking. It feels like you suddenly realised what the truth is, whereas actually you're thinking in quite an unrealistic way. So that's quite harmful because it reinforces itself. And so the version of me that I play in the show suffers from all of those things, and the stories that he tells are warped by them.
I mean, it's certainly... There were, of course, a lot of stories talking about gods and talking about how God was, in a sense, unfair upon your character, who is also called Tim. Despite all these different stories, do you think it was important either for people to have their own interpretation, or was it important to get across a single message in terms of what depression was like?
I think that the show does lend itself to a range of interpretations. That's just from talking to audiences and people who've watched it while I've been making it. I suppose if there is a singular thing, it's the general impression is what I want to get across. So I feel like quite often people have some idea of what it's like to be depressed, but there's a whole sort of I'm not sure how to articulate this.
So there's a build-up of what people think it's like, but they don't really understand. Because there was a section of the show where people were like, why don't you just feel better? Why are you, so down all the time? But it's not as simple as that, like you say.
Yeah. I suppose I would like for people to be able to understand it on a gut level, rather than just hearing things and not quite understanding how profound those symptoms are.
So for you, in terms of living life in the wider world, is it more kind of trying to gain perspective, or is it surrounding yourselves with those good people who can make you better? What is it, do you think, that helps lift people out of depression?
I would say primarily it's good medical treatment, to be honest. You can talk about things like chamomile tea and yoga and taking up a hobby all you want, but in the end, sometimes you need to go on medication, sometimes you need a long course of therapy, sometimes you need a strict exercise regimen.
So it's definitely important for people like myself who doesn't really understand so much. It's important that we all recognise this is a medical condition, not something that can just, change with perspective or something like that. Okay.
It's distressingly common, I found, because one of the things I did in making the show is gather stories from people with mental illnesses, and it's quite sad how often people talk about being trivialized or dismissed, or I suppose being treated like they're just making a fuss over nothing.
Was it hard for you to sort of go into that during the performance, to surround yourself with life and perspective of someone with depression? Was it difficult? Because a lot of method actors like to say we want to get into the skin of the person we want to portray, but is it tough for you as an actor to get back into, that whole thought process in order to give the deep performance that everyone comes to see?
Good question. I don't know whether I would think of myself as an actor in this show, actually, because it is just a different version of myself that I'm playing. It's not really a fictional character as such. It has been difficult to work on the show, certainly, because it brings up a lot of things which make you feel bad, basically. Certainly, when I first wrote the script of the show, I was in a worse place than I am right now. And it's been difficult at times to go back to that kind of feeling. I wouldn't say it's so much the in the moment summoning of the emotion, or whatever you want to talk about it as, that's been hard. One thing that helped was that my director and I worked with a drama therapist. Her name is Holly Stoppett, and she's a theatre director as well as being a therapist. So we went down to Bristol and spent 2 days with her, which was really great because she has had a long time working with mental health and theatre, so she knows how you can do it safely.
I mean, do you think it really helps separating Tim the actor from Tim in everyday life? For you, was it kind of better to kind of gain a better understanding of what it was like with depression to then separate yourself from it?
I don't know if I am that separated from it, to be honest. Certainly, I'm a different person on stage, but I'm just a more open and expressive me who can speak more loudly. I don't know whether there is that partitioning off necessarily for this show. And perhaps if I didn't have so much experience of it, that would be a very helpful thing, but it feels like it all bleeds together, to be honest. I think that's a part of the show.
But in terms of a personal journey, was it certainly important for you to kind of use this as a kind of stepping stone towards becoming a better person?
I don't think it's sort of led me to any particular epiphanies. I had a small epiphany while I was working with Holly in Bristol, but that was kind of therapy, so you sort of expect that. And in itself, actually, that very much justified the time that I spent with her. I guess it has given me, in a way, it's nice to have gained some benefit from having all these problems. Is being able to do a show about it and have people say, this was a show that I enjoyed and I've learned something from it.
And certainly you talked about afterwards kind of the process you went through, not just to learn more about yourself, but other people's struggles with mental illness. Tell us a bit about that process.
So originally I was planning on working with a local mental health organisation to do that. But unfortunately, I think they've had their funding cut recently, so I think they just weren't able to communicate with me anymore. Probably I slipped down the list quite a lot, so I wasn't able to do it with them. I ended up just having to use an online survey to collect people's stories. And it made for some very heavy reading, to be sure. One of the, I can't really talk about individual stories, but certainly it's not a rosy picture. And I think the overwhelming impression was that people feel they're very isolated and they feel they're very alone. And, well, funnily enough, they're not alone because everybody feels like that. That doesn't really help, unfortunately.
Did it help you seeing that other people were also in a similar situation during that research?
It's difficult to say. I do have quite a lot of friends who have mental health problems. It's unfortunately quite common in the arts, so it's more so than the nationwide average, for instance.
They often say that comedians, in particular, suffer more from depression than anyone else.
Yeah. For whatever reason, there is definitely a big overlap between people in the industry and people suffering from depression and anxiety, particularly, as well as other conditions. So it wasn't quite as much of an eye-opener as it might have been otherwise. But yeah, it definitely was.
Moving on to local theatre, is it getting more difficult to put on performances? Certainly with things like budget cuts and so on. Is it getting more difficult to try and put on shows?
Yeah, in a word, yes. It's so in Sheffield, one of our problems is that we have a very disconnected art scene. So, for example, all of the people who make dance shows go to the dance shows, but they don't go to the theatre shows, and the theatre people don't go to the dance shows. And they are separate from the comedy scene. We don't really have any organisations. There are a few who are relatively recently set up that are trying to connect everyone together, but that's a very ambitious goal. We don't really have any sort of infrastructure that can do that, and certainly the local authority has no money to fund the arts, which some local authorities are lucky enough to have some, which is obviously always nice for people in my position. We do have some very good organisations around there. The Delicatessen have been a big help to me.
Yeah, and that's right in the city centre, of course.
Yes, they're moving to a different building soon. Thankfully, they have got a new building to move to. And of course, Dino is the venue where I did my show, which is going to be around for a while, I think. But yeah, it's definitely not easy. We have the Sheffield Theatres organisation, which is the sort of face of professional theatre in the city. And below that, you kind of have to sort of muddle through it by yourself.
Just one last question on politics, because it is a politics show, and I suppose I have to finish on a political question. Mental health has recently politically been something that's entered the mainstream. It began with the Liberal Democrats, Labour under their new leader making new promises over mental health funding, and so are the Conservatives now. Do you think it's important that the government does more? Because there is a crisis in mental health.
Yeah, definitely. It's I suppose it's a problem because for so long it's been a very poorly understood area. And it's not just to do with people who've gone over the edge of the cliff, so to speak, like I have. But it's also about people's well-being and happiness.
Mm.
And if we could have, say, a public health initiative and teaching in schools about how to take care of your mental health, what the warning signs are for mental illness, because when I first developed depression, I had no idea what was happening. If everybody learned that at the age of 8 or 10, then I think probably we'd be a healthier nation. So yeah, I'd love to believe that the next government will take mental health really seriously. But I'm kind of cynical, as you might expect. So fingers crossed, yeah.
Okay, and also just one last point on the NHS services, because as I understand it, there is currently a 6-month waiting list just to see people. Are things really that poor on the ground?
I think it's extremely variable depending on where you are and what your problem is. Certainly, I know that when you have extremely urgent problems,
It's back.
excellent. So when you have very urgent problems, I know that there is a whole cascade of interventions which happens. But often it's more important to catch people, or not more important. It's very important to catch people before they need the life-saving treatment, just the life-improving treatment. And yeah, it is very often a case of long waiting lists, and I've been lucky and I've jumped ahead of a waiting list because somebody just happened to become free at the time. That happened to me twice actually, and it's been a real boon. And I think also there's an over-reliance on medication because of this. It's very easy just to prescribe an antidepressant. It's much harder to say we can get you into therapy within the next 6 months to a patient, probably, even when they probably don't need the drugs as much as they do the therapy.
Well, Tim, I'd like to thank you for what was a deeply thoughtful interview. I hope everything goes well. What's your next performance? Or is it no fixed date?
I don't have anything lined up, but I should probably mention the Unshot Festival, which is happening next week at Dina, which is on Cambridge Street. So it's on the Wednesday through Sunday, I think. You can check it out on Facebook, and there's a website. Google Unshot Festival Sheffield. I imagine you'll find out more about it. A whole range of stuff, from comedy to performance art, and it's all fairly easy.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you, Tim, and this was episode 7. Tomorrow we have Dom, I forget his second name. He's SU president, you know who he is. Should be going on at about quarter past 12. But that was it for episode 7. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
And see you tomorrow.